So in this lecture, we're going to be looking at the Water Framework Directive. So learning outcomes after this video are to be introduced to the Water Framework Directive, the terms high status water bodies, blue dot catchments, and priority areas for action. So the first bit we're going to look at is just some background to the Water Framework Directive. So it was established as a framework for the protection of all waters, so rivers, lakes, estuaries, coasts, and groundwater. It was adopted by the EU in 2000, and it was given legal effect in Ireland in 2003. It was a unique piece of legislation at the time because it looked at both the waters themselves, so the water bodies, and their dependent wildlife habitats under one piece of environmental legislation. And this holistic approach to water bodies in general was unique and was kind of new at the time. So just in terms of timeline, so it was initiated in 2000. We then followed a series of cycles. So cycle 1 ran from 2009 to 2015, cycle 2 to 2018 to 2021, and we're currently in cycle 3, which started last year, and will run to 2027. So the aim of the Water Framework Directive is water quality management centered on river basins. So river basins are natural geographical features that occur in the landscape, and it's basically from the source of the water in the uplands all the way down to the sea. So it's a from source to sea approach. The aim is to achieve a good status for all waters by a set deadline. So at the moment, we're aiming for the end of cycle 3, which is 2027. It also aims to streamline the legislation, prevent further deterioration of our water bodies, protect and enhance our aquatic ecosystems, and promote sustainable water use. So this is the Water Framework Directive process. So each cycle throughout the Water Framework Directive will go through these number of stages. So the first stage is to characterize the water body. So this sets the scene. It sets baseline water quality status, identify how and why water bodies are being impacted by human activities. It identifies water bodies that are at risk of not meeting the Water Framework Directive objectives, which water bodies require further action, and what are the significant pressures impacting these water bodies. And this will then go on to inform our environmental objectives and our program of measures. So the next steps are the environmental objectives. So once we've characterized our water bodies and identified their status according to the best information, the next thing to do is to set the objectives, mainly to prevent the deterioration of waters, restore waters that are not meeting Water Framework Directive status, and prevent further declines in water quality. Then we design our program of measures. So this is where we set and devise all of our directives, our legislation and policies in order to implement our environmental objectives. And then we move on to our river basin management plans. So this is a document that provides all of the detail on how you plan to achieve the objectives of the Water Framework Directive in your area. So every river basin will have its own plan. So all of the characterization data, type of water body, number of water bodies, significant pressures, and point and diffuse sources of pollution will all be identified for each individual river basin and included in this river basin management plan. It will also contain information on things like monitoring networks and how our environmental objectives will be achieved within that basin. Then the next thing we need to do is to implement everything we have outlined in our river basin management plan, including our program of measures. Usually means that the river basin is divided into sort of smaller water management units. Basically, it's a smaller, more manageable geographical area. And this is where we go into further investigation of the pressures and measures that will be implemented during the river basin management plan. It identifies key sources of pollutants looks at water status and risks to water management. Then once we've implemented our program of measures, we then go on to monitor. So there are different types of monitoring. So surveillance monitoring, which gives you a general idea of what's happening, looks at long-term trends. Then we have some operational monitoring. So this is specific monitoring, which looks at the effectiveness of our program of measures. So by monitoring, we can tell whether our program of measures are working or not. And then we have some investigative monitoring as well. So, for example, if you have a particular water body that's failing to meet the Water Framework Directive objectives, then we would do some targeted monitoring to try and identify why it's failing to meet its objectives. Then the final step is to revise. So you will look at all of the monitoring data, assess whether your program of measures and your river basin management plan and your implementation plans are working. And then during the next cycle, you will revise, and then you'll go back to the beginning and characterize and set your new environmental objectives. So we're currently in cycle 3 of the Water Framework Directive, which started last year and runs till 2027. The proposed theme of this cycle are the right measure in the right place, which is supported and delivered by an increased level of ambition, integrated catchment planning, and multiple benefits. So any measures that are put in place need to have multiple benefits for things like climate change, reducing water quality, and increasing biodiversity. What this translates into, so our scale of action, is 2,500 kilometres of riverside interception measures, so riverside buffers, a minimum of 20,000 hectares of organic soil rewetting, focusing on peatlands, at least a 50% reduction in nitrogen losses to waters from agriculture, detailed examination of 2,000 to 7,000 structures or barriers on rivers, such as weirs and dams, sustained high level of investment by Irish Water in wastewater infrastructure, and further work is also needed in preventing further deterioration of water bodies, so focusing on increased compliance and increased and smarter investment. So the next term I will introduce you to is high status water bodies. So these water bodies are the best of the best. So they're the most pristine water bodies that we would have in Ireland. And the Water Framework Directive has several objectives. One of these is to prevent the deterioration of surface water bodies, and in particular these high status water bodies. So these aren't really allowed to decline, or they shouldn't decline to good status or worse. They have the best water quality, so they have undisturbed catchment conditions, and they're as close to natural or pristine as possible. They've got the best water quality, so little or no excess nutrients or pollutants. Things like riverbeds will be free of excess siltation, so really nice, clear water, low productivity systems. They're quite unique and nice environments. They contain many species unique to them habitats and species that are sensitive to pollution. So any deterioration in water quality would mean that these species wouldn't be able to survive in these waters, so they need to be protected. They may also be areas of high biodiversity containing rare or threatened species, so it's important that we protect them. They also have a natural morphology, so they haven't been modified in any way. So if it's a river, the channel hasn't been straightened or dammed. There's no weirs in them, things like that. So this little pie chart on the side is our number of high status water bodies. So you can see rivers makes up the majority. So 334 rivers are at a high ecological status, and the next highest is lakes. So we have 41 lakes with a high ecological status. If we look at the national trend of high status water bodies over time, so 319 river water bodies were designated with a high status from 2016 to 2021, and less than half are currently meeting the objective. So we have a lot of high status water bodies that are not currently meeting their objective. Over this period of the total high status river water bodies, 43 improved in ecological status, 47 declined since the last assessment. So we have an overall net decline of 4 river water bodies in high status objective water bodies over this period. So we're seeing a net decline in a number of these high pristine river water bodies, which is concerning. If you look at the bar chart here on the slide, so the first bar is from 1987 to 1990. So you can see we have a high number of high status water bodies. In particular, we have our Q5, which is the best of the best, so our highest status water bodies in the light blue. And you can see that the number of Q5 high status water bodies in particular has declined markedly over time, which is concerning. So we would use these high status Q5 river water bodies to set our baseline conditions. So if these are deteriorating, it's a concern because we can't set our baseline measures as to how to improve the rest of our river water bodies. If you look at the main pressures impacting these high status waters, the main one is hydromorphology. So basically any changes in river channels, so for example straightening, damming, weirs is really impacting the habitats there. Other impacts are agriculture is the next highest, followed by other anthropogenic impacts and forestry. What this translates to kind of into the pressures is the highest pressure is habitat morphological impact. So this is kind of the physical removal of a habitat or a substrate. Then we have nutrient pollution coming from point or diffuse sources of pollution, things like nitrogen and phosphorus entering the system. Then we have habitat hydrological impact, so any changes in flow or water level. Next, we'll look at the Blue Dots catchment program, which aims to protect high status water bodies. So another name for high status objective water bodies are blue dots or blue dot catchments. They either currently have a high ecological status or they've been set a high ecological status in the recent past, and the aim is to restore them to a high status in the next River Basin Management Plan, so 2022 to 2027. So the Environment Protection Agency have identified waters in Ireland that should have a high status, and these are known as our blue dot waters or our blue dots. Many of these are small upland streams, and because they occur in the uplands, they have a knock-on effect on the water quality downstream. So the overall aim of the Blue Dots Catchment Programme is to protect or improve Ireland's highest quality waters. So I've displayed a map there, and the areas outlined in blue are our Blue Dot catchments, and I've put a link to the map on the slide as well. So you can see they're mainly located in the west, with smaller amounts in the Midlands and in the east. And basically within these catchments, it requires the cooperation of local and public authorities and communities living within the catchments to kind of implement the programs of measures to try and restore the high status water bodies. So a project that supports the Blue Dot Catchments Programme is the Waters of Life project. So it basically aims to enhance high status waters through catchment scale demonstration projects to test and validate the effectiveness of locally tailored best practice measures and results-based payment schemes across a range of land uses. So high status waters are also written to the Acres Cooperation Project. So where catchments have been identified as having high status waters, they may be eligible for Tier 1 priority entry to the general scheme. So if an applicant has at least half a hectare of land and with a high status water objective mapped area. And then to be considered for priority access, they have to have one of the actions listed here. So riparian buffer zones or strips of grassland or arable land, management of intensive grassland next to a watercourse, planting of trees in a riparian buffer zone, planting new hedgerow, low input grassland, extensively grazed pasture, or environmental management of arable fallow. The final term I'll introduce you to is priority areas for. So priority areas for action are water bodies at risk of not achieving good or high water quality. And we give priority to the following type of water bodies. So our high status objective water bodies, or our blue dot waters, water bodies that are within protective areas such as special areas of conservation or natural heritage areas, and in water bodies where the water quality has got worse or it might worsen if we don't find the source of the pollution. Then additional priorities are to examine water bodies where the river rises, so look at headwaters first, so the real source of the water. Water bodies at a subcatchment scale. You want to aim to tackle multiple pollution sources together. Link the catchment areas to existing programs and community group initiatives, so action in areas where there's already existing programs and initiatives. They should build on improvements or measures already planned, and they should ensure an even distribution of actions to address different pollution sources and catchment types across the region. So thank you for listening to this lecture.